Hello, I'm Sean Murray, and this is The Conversation, where we take an alternative look at political events and current affairs through an Irish lens. In this show, we hope to pick, probe, investigate and uncover the stories that you want to hear. We go where mainstream won't go. This week, we talk to one of Ireland's finest comedians, a man that has recently taken Twitter by storm, now also an author. His recent book details the horrific consequences of addiction and the redemptive process of recovery. Never shying away from politics, he's been a strong advocate for Irish Reunification and Palestinian self-determination. Tadhg Hickey, welcome to the show.
Thanks a million, Sean. Delighted to be here.
Delighted to have you. So tell me, Tadhg, I've recently read your book and I was bemused by some of it, so the honesty in the writing in the book, and actually it was an amazing book, and it's great to see that someone just put it out there like you did. Particularly you're a comedian, you know, and you're not very, very funny, but also very, very profound. And I really enjoyed it.
Jesus, thanks a million, man. Thank you.
And the stuff, I mean, your childhood growing up, do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, like I'd say it was a happy childhood, you know, so, and this is the funny thing about drinking, because alcoholism is a mental illness, and that's kind of the premise of the book, I suppose. I feel like in Ireland, people think of drinking and drinkers and alcoholics as a kind of an aberration, you know, that they've done something wrong morally, but the fact is that they're sick, and I was sick, but I wasn't always sick. And I suppose that's the point of the childhood. There was moments where I felt, you know, and when I say sick, I mean, you need something to treat the illness, and the illness really is kind of, for me anyway, anxiety. Uncomfortableness, I think, is, I might have called it, but I wouldn't have put the term anxiety on it, but that anxiety would have come and it would have gone. You know, it wasn't something that was there all the time. It would kind of spike, and it would spike in bizarre settings. Like, I remember being a kid and playing soccer with my buddies, and just this kind of sense of gloom coming over myself and feeling uncomfortable in myself. And like, it was kind of working class 80s Cork. Like, I wasn't about to go home and, you know, call a family meeting about it. We didn't talk about those kind of things. And as I say, when I was struck with a bit of anxiety, I probably thought I was mad. There was a big fear, whether it was just me or it was my community. You didn't want to be mad. You know, mad people were taken away by men in white coats and they were brought to hospital. Sometimes if your drinking got totally out of hand, you'd kind of wander over the line into madness, like, and so he's gone away to some place and he's kind of locked up. That's what you didn't want. And that would have been a fear of mine from a very early age, because this anxiety, I wouldn't have called it that at the time. The feeling comes up, you're kind of going, am I mad? But then it would go away again, and I'd enjoy doing the things I did, like playing football and hanging out with my mates and stuff. And as I say, I was a happy kid. I was obsessed with my dad. I used to kind of follow my dad around. He was a good bit older. I was a real afterthought in the family. I was quite young. But as I detail in the book, he was an ordinary man, but he was extraordinary to me. Like, he just seemed like he had life all figured out. Whereas I felt like I was kind of caught up in myself. I was worried how I was coming across. Did people like me? How do I get people to like me? He just seemed to be breezing through life, not worrying about any of these things. You know, he just seemed to have it figured out. And again, even with the drinking, he enjoyed his few pints. He'd be singing songs. He'd be getting the pub going. He'd come home and then he'd get up and he'd go to work and he'd look after his kids. That seemed to be the way to do it. So everyone in my world drank, in the family and the community, everyone drank. The key was to drink, but definitely look after your family and go to work. If you were getting up and going to work, it didn't matter what state you got into bed in. And unfortunately, very early on in my childhood, when I started drinking, I should say, when I was 15, 16, I was unable to get up and perform.
Yeah, so it was like a functional alcoholism, and by that stage you couldn't do it. Yeah,
like, I mean, at the start, I suppose there's all sorts of stuff going on. I mean, I was also, as soon as I started drinking, and it's something I detail in the book, it's in our junior cert night down south. It's like a big ceremony that you're going to go drinking, like it's your first primary exams or whatever. And so there was people drinking before that for me. So I was quite nervy as a kid. My older brothers were wilder. They were kind of like out fighting and hunting and stuff like that. I was more bookish, kind of like, you know, under a tree reading John Keats type of young fella. And but then suddenly I just took a drink and I just transformed into the superhero, like, and that's the best way I've been able to kind of crystallize what addiction is really like. So you've got a young person, there was stuff going on at home, You know, there was issues with my mother, which we may or may not get into, and I felt, I suppose there was trauma there. I wouldn't have put that term in it at the time, but it was mostly just that uncomfortable feeling. I didn't know where it come from. I just knew that I felt uncomfortable, and I knew when I picked up this can, after one or two of these cans, the feeling of uncomfortableness was gone. But more than that, I felt like I was a superhero, and I don't think the people around me were feeling that. Like, they were having a good time, but I knew straight away. I mean, the best way I could kind of distill it, I think, is they probably wanted to be drinking and having fun, and very early on I needed it. I really just needed it very early on. But having said all that, I was reasonably good at school. I was ambitious. I wanted to do well. I wanted to get a good leaving. I wanted to go and do college and stuff like that. So I knew when I started drinking that it was something that needed to be managed. So for a while, I was able to manage it pretty well. Like, you know, again, looking back on it, it's probably weird that you would be managing your drinking at 16 or 17 or 18 at all. But I knew if I started drinking, I probably wouldn't stop, and I wouldn't turn up for the thing that I needed to do the next day. So if I had something important on, I just wouldn't go drinking.
And you also noted in the book that your saviour was through acting and writing. You want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so the uncomfortableness that I had, to go back to that again, you could get rid of that loads of different ways, you know, and drinking was a great outlet for it. But another way was when I was younger playing sport. I played soccer reasonable level in Cork. I wasn't a bad soccer player, and that would often take it away. But getting involved in performing or acting a bit, normally the type of acting I tried to do involved comedy, and I suppose that was the origins of the comedy thing. Putting on voices, making funny noises, taking the piss out of people in my family, and doing impressions of them, all that kind of stuff. And when I was performing, and mostly in school and with friends and stuff, people would laugh, and that was another addiction straight away. Like, but it definitely got rid of that feeling of uncomfortableness, and it gave me a sense of that this is kind of the thing that I'm supposed to be at. And when I was doing the thing that I was supposed to be doing, I felt like I was enjoying it. Again, just that feeling of like there's something up with me. I feel uncomfortable and I can't put my finger on it. Just started to dissipate.
So what was the spark then that led to a career in comedy?
I think one of the first moments that I thought to myself, I would like to do comedy, was actually when I was a kid, and my sister and myself were very close, and she had a real influential role on my taste in everything. It started off with music. She would have been listening to Led Zeppelin and The Doors and Pink Floyd, and she'd have all those old records and stuff. So when I was starting secondary school and other kids were listening to Oasis and Blur and stuff, I was listening to kind of 60s American rock and stuff, and I felt like I was kind of cool because of her. But it wasn't me. Like, I was just kind of following whatever she did. And she also had a really refined kind of sense of humor and kind of, you know, Rick Mail and The Young Ones and all that type of kind of anarchic British comedy, which I loved. So I used to try and make her laugh, and I thought if she laughed at something that I had said, that was a good bar, you know, that I'd made my sister laugh because she was funny. And then it became a kind of a thing of like, oh, how much can I get her to laugh? And like, oh, she didn't like this thing. And it's like my first audience, I suppose. I was also trying to make my mother laugh and whatnot. And then I remember so by secondary school, I think, you know, the feeling of starting secondary school is, I was a fat kid as well, right? I hope I can say fat. I know it's probably not the nice thing to say these days, but I am saying it about myself. And I got to school, you're fat, my hair was kind of weird, and you're just self-conscious. Like, you're kind of going, how am I going to fit in here? My brothers, as I say, were tougher men, and they probably would have went straight into the kind of like, I'll kick your head in type of thing. And I knew I didn't really have that in me, but I knew I had a sharp tongue, and I knew I could make people laugh. And I also knew I could make people a bit scared, because if they mocked you and you mocked them back and you made other people laugh more, I was aware that was a real strong currency. So I just fell into kind of making people laugh, and no one really bullied me, and I kind of went to the top of the kind of social structure in school because I was able to look after myself with my tongue as opposed to my fists, you know. So that was the first inkling that I was good at it. But then you go on this whole journey of, you know, am I going to be so cocky as to demand that people sit in a room and listen to me because I'm so funny? Like, that, for me, that's an it's an audacious expression of self-confidence and self-belief. And I didn't really have the balls to do that for a long time. What I initially did, I did music, and I love music as well. I mean, that was a huge passion of mine. I was in a band, and I would try and make some of the lyrics funny, and I was kind of playing the role of a comedian within a band. So I was hiding in a band as a comedian, I think. We were called Exit Pursued by a Bear.
What did you call it?
Exit Pursued by a Bear. So it's a pretentious quote from Winter's Tale, and the whole band was very pretentious, and I was I suppose the main reason for that. But that was my way of kind of doing rock comedy or rock kind of theatrics, I suppose. And then later on, when that folded, I was kind of doing bits and pieces of acting, and then an opportunity arose to start a comedy troupe. So again, it was not me on my own; it's me with two other people. So that was the kind of journey, I suppose, into comedy.
There's a film, isn't there? It's a bit like The Office, because I knew you were a fan of The Office.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of rock group of that kind. And I know Ricky Gervais was actually influenced, isn't it? What was the name of that film?
Oh my God, what's it called? Lads.
This is Spinal Tap.
Spinal Tap.
Yeah,
That's it.
This is Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
I actually feel, this is a weird thing to say, but I feel like I've got a bit in common with Ricky Gervais. Like, he was like, a big influence of mine. He was in a band, he studied philosophy in college, and he was like kind of, doing his own thing, and then kind of fell into this big, massive comedy opportunity. So I always felt I'd get to a certain age, probably 40, and then these massive comedy opportunities would happen for me. Hasn't happened yet, John. Not down south anyway. I'd probably get more work like in the Middle East, but anyway, that's another story.
Well, now, speaking about the Middle East and more closer to home, politics closer to home, a lot of your comedy revolves around politics. And I read somewhere that you were influenced, maybe slightly, in your politics by the Late Late Show one night. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think it was possibly 1994, I think it was. So I was a kid. At that stage, it would have been probably 10 or 11. And I was watching it live, I suppose, like most of Ireland watched the Late Late Show at the time. And forgive me, I don't have all the members of the panel, but it was Gerry Adams was giving an interview, and it was a thing. We were watching it because Gerry Adams was going to be on, and it was a fairly apolitical house that I grew up in. People probably were sympathetic to the Republican struggle, but not in any demonstrative way, really. And certainly from the media that we consumed, we kind of were to believe that Gerry Adams almost personified all the problems with the North, that almost like, every aspect of the conflict was on his shoulders, and that he bore personal responsibility for everything that had happened. I think it was the same night that Gay Byrne refused to shake his hand, and he basically sat down, and I didn't know that much about him before then, and I didn't know that much about the North either. And I think that's the key point, that, when I watched that interview, I think Austin Curry was part of the panel. There was basically a lineup of people trying to take pops at him and traduce him in a variety of ways, and to pin, as I say, the whole conflict on his shoulders. And I just witnessed somebody really calmly, without any emotion whatsoever, refute every accusation that was coming to him, but more importantly, contextualized the conflict for the first time. I'd never heard that before. I hadn't heard anything about loyalist paramilitaries before. I just thought there was one, and I wasn't quite sure who they were fighting as a kid, but I just knew the IRA were fighting Britain, and that the impression I got from the mainstream media down south was that, Ireland had won its independence. A few counties didn't make the grade, unfortunately, and they were kicking up all this storm and violence and murder because they were prone to murderousness. And we wish they would just stop it, because they're really embarrassing us now on a kind of an international level. No, I'm being a little bit playful when I say that, but that is roughly the sense of the North I had as a kid. So I wouldn't even say that I became like an Irish Republican watching that interview from Gerry Adams. I just became somebody that was really interested in the North. And that was the main thing for me. And because nobody had ever contextualized the conflict before, and more importantly, nobody had ever stated the important role that the South had played or not played, as whichever way you'd look at it, in creating the causes and conditions. And nobody had ever kind of detailed that before. For me, up until that moment, it was a kind of a separate thing. It was happening in a different place. It was unconnected to us. And as I say, we wish that they would just stop it. So definitely my head blew off my shoulders. I was like, okay, there's more to this than the mainstream media in the South is portraying. There's much more to this story than RTE and the Independent and the Irish Times are telling us. Because even, I mean, as a young kid, I was just interested in the news, and I'd read bits and pieces of the newspaper and stuff. But so yeah, that there was another alternative version of this history out there was new to me.
And did that galvanise you to explore things further, just politically? I mean, did you read up more on what was happening in the North? Or?
Yeah, I mean, within a few years, I suppose, I would have been a Sinn Féin supporter, I suppose, in school. And that would have been unusual, I think, in the South in that period as well. I remember there was two lads in my in my class in secondary school, and we were both kind of interested in Sinn Féin, and we went to a Sinn Féin youth meeting. And one of the lads, Ken is his name, he had a copy of On Phoblacht, and I was reading On Phoblacht on my lunch break, and one of my teachers took me outside the door to ask me, was everything all right at home? And I think, nothing that I've come across since encapsulates the complete misunderstanding of everything in the North that was going on down South at the time. And, some people were doing it maliciously, some people had agendas, but most people were just eating up the propaganda. And you see it today in the conflict that's going on right now in Gaza. Most people are just ordinary people going about their business. It's the people who are actually perpetrating and putting the propaganda out there. They have a responsibility, but your average person will become influenced by the propaganda that they consume. So I think most people down South just had this idea that there was just one perpetrator of violence in the North, and that Gerry Adams was a representative for them. And so he needed to be neutralised and censored, and that's, I suppose, what was happening, literally.
You've mentioned Gaza there, and we'll get to that in a second. I just want to probe you more about your involvement with Irish reunification. And when I say involvement, you've been a strong advocate for reunification. Why is it important to you?
I think it's important to me because it connects directly to what I was saying earlier of growing up in a state that felt like it was completely disconnected from this other state. As soon as I started reading, I realised that that's not the case at all, and that there's a community of people in the North that don't feel disconnected. They feel the opposite. They feel like, not that they feel Irish, they are Irish, and they think of themselves as part of the island of Ireland, and it would be their wish that will be a 32-county republic. I think as you move towards breaking that sense of separation between the two, and you can do it physically. So, I'm one of the few people I know in the South that goes to the North regularly, and I'm not saying that in any kind of a flex. It's an embarrassing thing to say. The comedians on the scene, like Mario Rosenstock would be a good friend of mine. I think he's amazing. And he was telling me that I think he went to Belfast for the first time a couple of years ago, and that would be typical. The man's been touring for 20 years, and he was wondering would people kind of know his stuff, whatever, and like the gig was sold out. I think he either did Ulster Hall or somewhere massive anyway, and everyone knew his stuff, everyone had been following his stuff, and it's just typical of that sense of that kind of like spiritual, emotional, practical disconnect. I have, be it in my work, in my social life, and making friends up here and stuff, that disconnect has never really been there for me. And if the disconnect isn't there, it makes no sense that they're two different states. Also, the history of Irish republicanism, I mean, if you're an Irish Republican and you're an anti-imperialist, it would feel that it's the fitting thing for the destiny of the country would be to be reunited. And I would definitely make no apologies for that. It can sometimes be a slightly controversial thing to say or a slightly uncomfortable thing to say down South. And what I'm trying to do a little bit with my work is to get to the root of why anyone should be made to feel that that's uncomfortable. And I think, something that we've spoken about a bit off camera, young people are amazing because young people are challenging that Southern perspective all the time, that it's two separate states and two separate mentalities. So they're just some of the reasons why, I suppose, as an Irish Republican, shocker, I would want to see a united Ireland.
You're still tuned into The Conversation, your weekly alternative probe of political events and current affairs around Ireland. I'm joined by our special guest, comedian and author Tadhg Hickey. Moving on to events in Gaza. that we've been all horrified by this last few months. You've been a very strong advocate for Palestinian self-determination. Has that been, and I spoke earlier, you said you'd met many new friends in the Middle East and stuff like that. Tell us a bit about that.
I think with Palestine, and it's a little bit like with United Ireland as well, it comes back to something we touched on at the start of, like, in my drinking, I was inauthentic. You have to be inauthentic to kind of survive. You have to lie, you have to cheat, you have to let people down in order to keep doing it. And when I got sober, one thing I was very clear about for myself was to actually protect myself, to stop myself from falling into possibility of drinking again and taking drugs again, which I know will ultimately lead, if I relapse, I've no doubt that I'll die, and I don't want to die. So it's very basic with me. I have to be authentic. So if I have personal views about the conflict, and if I have personal views about my perspective on wanting a united Ireland, needless to say, a united Ireland that would be inclusive of everyone, not a narrow nationalism, I have no interest in that. If I have those views, I need to reflect those views in my work in order to be authentic. That's the way I would look at it, and I hope that doesn't sound too kind of, I don't know, lavish or pretentious or whatnot, but that's the way I do think. So for instance, if I would lose some work opportunities down south for being authentic in my views, that's absolutely fine collateral damage. I need to be authentic. So in the case of Palestine, I have always felt that it's actually one of the most, bizarrely, it's one of the most easy conflicts to understand, which is in direct opposition to the key Israeli claim that it's too complex for you and I to ever understand. It's just a case, it's a land grab, it's settler colonialism. And I think if I'm going to be authentic about Ireland, I need to also be authentic about Palestine and not worry too much about the backlash that you will get. Also, I have friends that are doing comedy in the States and Canada and places like that. They have backlash, like they have serious, they have serious repercussions to worry about. In Ireland, it's less so. So I feel like, many Arab friends have sent me messages. I mean, if you saw my messages on Instagram, like it's hard not to be crying at times, because there's people saying, it's refreshing to hear someone from the West just highlight what's going on here. Like, so it's basically like Ireland on a kind of a global level. For me, it's like, people hating you because they don't want to have the conversation, and then people loving you because they see it's unusual for a white face to be fronting something that's talking about the decades of oppression, murder, mayhem, second-class citizenship, you name it, apartheid that they're living under. So again, if you're going to be authentic, you accept that you're going to get some people, I had a Zionist witch saying that she was putting a curse on me and all that kind of stuff. But then I had loads of Muslim friends saying that they'd undone the curse, so that was a bit of crack, But as regards work and stuff, I made a kind of a pact with myself a long time ago that I was going to be real, to me anyway. I'm not saying it's the reality, it's my belief system. And if that means that I don't get work with the BBC or RRT, then so be it.
I think you're being too kind to yourself when you say, you don't get it hard here as an artist when you stray off the conventions. I mean, like, we as a country steeped in censorship, I think still if you stray off those conventions that you do get it hard, and you see that particularly from establishment journalists, establishment politicians, and I think you've been the receiving end of that also. Yeah,
I suppose with journalists, they'll have jobs. Like, I don't, because I'm working for myself, I'm lucky. You know what I mean? Like, they'll attempt to, so there's people online who've tried to get my gigs cancelled and whatnot.
Welcome to the club.
Huh?
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. I suppose that's, to be honest with you, that can be tough at times, because when that campaign was going online by this, I say campaign as being kind to the guy, like, 'cause it seemed to just be one guy. But I also have a new baby, and I have a partner and I have kids. Like, I've got 2 kids. So like, it's easy for me to be like, it's like the song, my love ain't got no money, but he's got a strong beliefs. It's grand for me to say that, but I need to be able to provide for my family as well. So it can be scary at times to think that, oh, okay, what happens here if I actually get completely cancelled? But I don't know, maybe I'm just a bit of a dreamer that way, but I just kind of think if you just plow on And also, I feel like with the stuff I'm doing, I'm not being nasty either, really. You know what I mean? I'm not I'm not doing a Dave Chappelle on it, and I'm on my third special that's basically targeting the trans community. Like, you know, I think they've probably been targeted enough, Dave, without your third special. Don't get me wrong, Dave Chappelle is a comedy god to people like me. You know, his early stuff is, the Chappelle Show is some of the best satire I've ever seen in my life. And that's what makes it so sad, that he went from punching up so elegantly to now just lazily punching down. But I feel myself, and I'm always checking in with people that I respect to see am I doing the right job with it. You know, before I write a sketch about Palestine, for instance, I've got about 2 or 3 Palestinian friends that I run it by, just to make sure that the detail is there and stuff, because I don't want to become lazy or assume that they want this white lad from Cork to speak for them. Like, you know, even at the start of October, when October 7th happened, and then the absolutely insane response that we've seen since, some people said, oh, you should do a sketch on this, or you should do a sketch on that. I asked Palestinians, because I was like, this mightn't be the moment for comedy. You know, I don't want to come in on something like, it's hard to even think of what, and you'll be able to tell me better, what the Irish parallel for this is. You know, what Palestinians are going through right now. I mean, it feels like it's Nakba .1 or whatever, like, you know. So was comedy even an appropriate thing to do? And time again, they'd come back, and that's, I think, why Irish and Palestinians get on so well. They've got this jet black sense of humour. My Palestinian friends in Cork were like, man, we need you, like, get in there, and like, and also, a good buddy of mine in Cork was kind of saying, you'll never have an opportunity like this again, because the other side is making such a show of itself with its so-called propaganda, that you've got to get in there, like, or it's a missed opportunity if you don't, you know. So yeah.
So tell us what's happening this year. What are we going to see next from Tadhg Hickey?
Well, I've been lucky enough to build up a nice little following from the Arab world. Like on Instagram, I have, just if you're interested, I have much more followers in Turkey and Jordan than I would in Ireland.
Unreal.
Way more, like, yeah. Doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me at all, by the way. But so I'd like, I mean, in an ideal world, if I was going to do a tour again, I'd love to tour over there. I'd love to tour in places where it's news to me that someone from the West having a kind of an anti-imperialist perspective, and somebody shining a light on the hypocrisy and atrocities of the American empire, that would be a refreshing thing to see from their perspective. But it is. So I'd like to eventually go over there and tour there. And also, for a while now, I've been trying to turn a sketch I did a couple of years ago that caused a lot of controversy. You may have seen it, about a loyalist and a house share in Cork with the, you know, England, Scotland, Ireland and all that. I've been trying to turn that with another writer in Ireland, Michael West is his name, brilliant writer, playwright, into a full kind of TV show stroke film kind of effort. So, but it would go above, I mean, they're just standing for the actual, you know, that there's no depth to any of those characters. Like, it's just, you know, Scotland is just a crazy wig and a kind of a Scotland jersey. But we've built them up into full dimensional characters. I hope it could be a TV show, and I'm talking to people of significance who are interested in it, shall we say. So I would love to see some sort of Brexit, but it's a house share in Cork, develop into a TV show or a film.
Tadhg, looking forward to that, and it's always good to see you in Belfast. I'd say it'd be safe to consider your second home now.
Oh man, well definitely West Belfast anyway.
Well listen, thank you for coming. Always good to see you.
Pleasure, brother.
Okay. And that does it for another week. We'd love for you to join the conversation by sharing the link to today's programme to help us grow our audience across all our social media platforms. I'd like to thank our special guest, Tadhg Hickey. In the meantime, the conversation will be back next week with more investigations and analysis. I'm Sean Murray. Bye for now.